how you see the digital transformation impacting your experiences.
Sure. Well, good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody. I'm based in London, so I'm not quite sure what time zone it is right now. So yeah, I work for the Football Association. That's the English Football Association. You might recognise that I have a slight Scottish accent, but we're a very diverse company, and they allowed me to work for them. We're the governing body for football in England, and of course, I recognise I'm talking to a primarily North American audience, but I'm still going to say football because that's what we know it as. You might know it as soccer, but the rest of the world call it football. So I apologise in advance for my my inverse colonialism, I guess. We're the governing body for football in England. We were the first governing body for football globally back in the, 1800s. And we govern all aspects of the game. That's everything from managing our senior men's and women's teams. That's the teams that play in the World Cup or in the Olympics. All the way down to what we call grassroots football, which would be the football that you might play at weekends or your kids might play. And we manage all aspects of that. We have roughly 25 senior teams across the men's and women's games, including some disability teams as well. But then there are over 40,000 clubs in England. There's over 60,000 football teams and millions of players at that grassroots level within football across the country. On top of that, we also manage our national stadium, which is Wembley Stadium. That's got a 95,000 person capacity. In there, we host major football tournaments, such as our own Emirates FA Cup. We also host American football. So you will, if any of you are Jags fans, you will have possibly seen the Jacksonville Jaguars playing in our stadium over the past few years. We host some rugby games and a whole series of record-breaking concerts over the summer as well. We also manage a place called St George's Park, which is our national training facility. That's up in the Midlands in England, 15 or so indoor and outdoor pitches, as well as rehab facilities that players from all around the world come to get back to a good level of fitness. And there's a hotel attached to that as well. And we also run big competitions like the Emirates FA Cup, which has a global following. It's the most famous football cup competition in the world. And then other things like the Women's Super League in England. And then I mentioned earlier, grassroots football. We have hundreds of leagues and cup competitions up and down the country. And we help to manage and facilitate all of that. And then the other slightly boring but important stuff, we manage the governance of the game. So if a red or a yellow card is issued on the field, that passes through the systems that my team run. We also run safeguarding systems to help protect our younger players. And we're also a clearinghouse, a financial clearinghouse. So if any of you are familiar with the transfer windows that happen in football, any player that transfers into or out of the game in England, all the millions of pounds that is paid in that comes through our systems and through our bank accounts 3 or 4 times a year. We're also right now in the middle of a digital transformation process that I'm leading as the Chief Information Officer. And we're working hard to create more direct engagement with our participants in grassroots football, as well as the fans of the national team. And we've launched a whole bunch of digital products over the past few years, and right now very heavily focused on replacing our core football administration systems and migrating away from those legacy monolith platforms into a much more modular microservices-based architecture. But the two things that I think we're focusing on here today, for me personally, as Tiran has mentioned, is first of all, the in-stadium experience for a fan. And so from my perspective, the things that I'm interested in exploring there are really, how do we make sure the experience for the fan is as smooth as it possibly can be? So can we adopt the use of sensors to help us with digital signage, with parking, with wayfinding? Can we look at wearables for paperless tickets? Secondly, can we create opportunities for incremental revenue? So what can we do to streamline the point of sale process? What can we do to highlight relevant promotions to people as they come into the stadium or as they move around the stadium? Can we look at things like in-seat ordering and so on? And then finally, probably pretty important in today's slightly confusing world, making sure that we're safe and secure. So if you look at the COVID environment, we have a set of standards in the UK now that are called COVID secure, and that involves things like safe distancing and so on. How can we use sensors and 5G and the Internet of Things to make sure that occupancy levels are being managed appropriately? How can we transform those wayfinding signage displays to make sure we're directing people in the right way? How can we make sure stewards are allocated effectively? And then some of the basics like HVAC and facilities maintenance and so on. So that's the first area for me. The second area is what can we do to really transform our grassroots football experience? And so by that, I mean the football that you might play at the weekend in your local Sunday league that we have in England or across the UK. Or that your kids might play as well. So we've been exploring over the past few months the opportunity to use wearables to track performance. So we do that with our senior teams, but of course, in the senior men's teams and women's teams, the vests and so on that they wear are of a much higher standard. The cost of entry is far too high for 2.1 million players of the game across England. So how can we take the economies of scale that are now coming in from exploring and deploying IoT to allow us to track performance? But also, how can we do that not just with sensors, but also with video? And then how can we look at avoiding me as the CIO of the FA suddenly taking in terabytes of video data at the weekend of kids playing football in various locations, and then using my systems to analyze all that data and to clip and snip and send back out and so on. So how do we transform that process to add more value to those grassroots players, but without me having to do all the work, frankly? So those are probably the two areas, Taran, that I think are worth exploring today.
So just finishing up the context for today's discussion in two industry segments, you have two challenges of scale. One is a lot of people in one place in a stadium with a lot of services, a lot of data, a lot of connectivity. And another one, which is more the fanning out. That's where you have the grassroots, a lot of teams, a lot of players, a lot of distributed capabilities to introduce new technologies.
Yeah, exactly. One is local, hyper local almost, and one is very national.
Yeah, excellent. So we're going to come back to that because the scale is where telcos really can play an important role. So with that, let me turn to you, Brian. Brian, maybe we're going to talk about healthcare and life sciences. That's what you lead for Verizon. Share with us a little about your background and what is different in how Verizon is approaching the industry solution of B2B.
Sure. First, as you said earlier, brief is Brian Burke, and I'm the leader of healthcare, health insurance, and life sciences vertical for Verizon. And something that you had said in the intro is the telcos approach and what they've done and how their revenue models are adjusting. One of the things I'd like to add to what you shared is that because of the acceleration of technology, now be it 5G, IoT, MEC, et cetera, it's actually maybe different than you had set it up, is that it's unlocking the telco's ability to participate and to make an impact in healthcare and life sciences, or in media, or in sports and entertainment differently than it ever has before. Before, if you picked up the phone line and it went through, that was kind of your thinking of a telco. In the nascent days of picking up your flip phone or et cetera, and the call going through. But with the proliferation of technology, it's now touching almost every item that Craig had mentioned, transforming, wayfinding, addressing the challenges with COVID, wearables, analyzing data, and then looking at the micro and macro problems are the same across all industries, right? Even in healthcare. What I'll share is that our approach, and others, but I'm very proud of it, and our approach, it's unlocking our ability to truly be a global citizen. So I'll open the aperture for a minute and then focus it back in on our two areas. So we take, and I know that I do as well, take us being a global citizen very sincerely, and we have a movement, Citizen Verizon. But In doing so, what we're focused on is not only climate protection and what we're doing there, but applicable to today's conversation is really around human prosperity and digital inclusion. And with the advent of technology and what we'll talk about and what I'll share examples of how Verizon is making good on that and the early returns on what we're doing for human prosperity in healthcare and life sciences, and how to include folks that were otherwise being marginalized. So now what I'll share is that in COVID, because of COVID, there's the void or the disparity between the served and the underserved or marginalized is greater than ever. So, and in doing so, we've now seen the early adoption of telehealth that wasn't here a year ago. We're all aware of its meteoric rise across the globe, especially here in the States. But it's giving, I'll call it here in the States or North America, but especially in the US, kind of a taste of what's abroad, right? So there's a strong minority, some 40, 50% of the world only has one physician per 1,000 people, only has maybe one hospital bed for, depending upon how you want to slice the data, 500 to 1,000 people. And that's never become, that choke point has never become so apparent than it has the world's facing now its pandemic, and having that information at our fingertips. Through the use of technology and through the evolution of that, we can address those, and we are addressing it. So I'm excited to get to later in the discussion some of those example use cases of both, I'll call it the macro, how combating and advancing on an emergent issues, and then also for the broad inclusion. Teron, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. So continuing or closing on your particular approach and where you come from, share just a little more, if you can, with our audience, the unique flavor of an industry expert coming in from the industry vertical into the telco and what that does to shift the mindsets.
Absolutely. So often, right, so what we've seen in the past, what you haven't seen before is the large tech players have now entered into all facets, right? So whether it be the tech companies such as Google, Microsoft, Amazon showing up and entering into healthcare, so have telco. It behooves us to work with or enable and be working alongside of our partners. So at the end of the day, the idea of being able to bring the vertical knowledge of what those moments of care, what's needed at the point of service, the point of care, is very similar to trying to understand, but just a lot more complex, what's needed on game day, so that way the fan truly understands what's going on the front line, right? What's going on with the forward? What's going on with the goalie? What's going along with, and if I throw in some American football, you know, what's going on with the quarterback? So at the same time, it's what's going on with the patient. So those moments of care and that continuum are critical to understand. And working side by side of what the technology can do is co-developing with our partners. Because it's not just 5G, right? So there's, whether it's an IoT medical device, whether it's a smart wearable, whether it's in critical communications, each of these have to be teased out because they're all a component. Just saying you have 5G, just saying you have MEC, doesn't solve the granular need of what is that EMT in the back of an ambulance, or a Parkinson's patient who is on a chronic disease management in a chronic care setting, or when telehealth, I'll call it 2.0 or 3.0, when I'm going through my telehealth visit, and besides having a virtual meeting like we are now, the transportation of those biometrics. Each of those have different facets, let alone the complexities, as we all is in healthcare. It's the most highly regulated industry, bar none. So there are additional standards of not only on the data, but there are also additional standards of safety, security, and privacy. balancing that between the care providers, caregivers, and also those who are paying for it, right? The payers and that, or the government, as well as the technology. That's that delicate balance that you're trying to get that orchestration together. And I have arguably either one of the most challenging, the most fun, or roles I feel in the company of walking that balance and being that intersection between all of the good work that we can do and all of the work that's being done out, such as some of the work that we're doing with Cognizant. And Teron, it looks like you froze again.
Hopefully not. Hopefully it's just the video. So can you hear me, right?
We can.
Great. So that's a great preamble. I want to turn to you, Bob. Bob, you have a really interesting background. Your company that you were the CEO of Smart Edge was acquired by Intel, and you're no stranger to solving industry challenges. In fact, the products that you guys launch have been baked through field trials and for industry segment use cases. So share with us a little about what is Smart Edge and what is Intel doing in the area of solving industry vertical business problems.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'm Bob Pike. I'm with Intel. I actually work in the network platforms group, and interesting listening to the team. The good news with this new technology we have now that is coming in, virtualization allows us to both solve that dense problem that's at a hospital or at a venue that was described, and then also allows us to support these kind of wide area kind of let's say use cases. So there's both the edge computing and the network have come together now to solve in these two areas. So what is wonderful is we're really making the network smarter, for lack of a better term. I think that's why we picked Smart Edge. Now, Intel Smart Edge focused more on the premise and really on how do we help the, let's say, individual verticals kind of deliver a better experience, save money, maybe create greater safety. So a lot of what's gone on, I think, has been foreshadowed in the previous two discussions. We're really engaged with enabling the use case. And two things that seem to be the focal point. How do we make this simpler? And this is where I see the operators really coming in and assisting. How do we make it simple to allow this network connectivity to work with these edge use cases or these edge computing opportunities? So point of care, creating a better experience, letting a coach look at a replay to throw a flag, all these kinds of things create a better experience using these technologies. So, we're also seeing the use of AI in these settings. And again, it's taking that network data, that context about that device, that human, that thing, bringing it into the compute environment and taking a better action with it, making more expedient action with it. So, one area I will tell you where we see just a lot of wonderful kind of use cases is industrial and manufacturing. Just a ton of wonderful things going on in that segment. Really all about enabling the use case.
Thank you very much, Bob. So if you look at the panel today, we have a really interesting spectrum, right? Because Craig represents the pure industry. He is really your client, the telco client, for solving his problems of scale, whether it's at the stadium or outside the stadium. Brian, who comes from industry and sits on the telco side, represents the here's how we are thinking of transforming an industry. And Bob, you represent the core of the technologies that are part of the solution set. By the way, myself from Cognizant as a integrator, my day job is launching industry solutions for our customers. So it's a really interesting spectrum. Why don't we take a little of a customer journey walk, and I'll start with you, Craig. From the perspective of looking for outside enablers to transform the fan, the player experience, the guest experience, what is your vision, and maybe an example of a day in the life of what is an experience that would be part of the vision where you would like to go ahead, but also share with us a little of the challenges to bring it to life, because a lot of the problems that we have in every industry evolve around scale and the need to move the ship together with a lot of smaller ships accompanying it. So you need ecosystems to be part of the solution. So share with us what that looks like for you.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge for us. You know, I almost feel a little bit inadequate on this panel, because you've got people talking about life sciences and health and truly life-saving technologies and systems and processes. And then you've got those of us that try and put on a football match to entertain people. But I do try and remind myself that probably over the past 9 or 10 months, we probably recognize just how much some of that stuff is as essential to us as the healthcare that is important, that we miss our football, our entertainment, our sports. But I think one of the challenges that we do have is that despite the very, what would I say, flashy veneer, if you like, of football, the high-paid football players and so on, the actual industry itself is not flush with cash. We are a well-funded governing body, but compared to any other consumer-facing organization, we're really not that well-funded. So I think one of our challenges is trying to provide that real high-quality level of experience that our fans expect when they go into a venue, but doing it without detracting from our core mission, which is to improve essentially the health and fitness of the nation through providing sporting facilities across the whole country. So I think the first barrier for us is cost effectiveness. How can we learn from what is happening around other industries? How can we adopt and adapt that without having to be the source of innovation and invention? And that's probably one of the things that I see as a core strength for a telco to help us with, because of course you're across every industry, you're across every sector, you're across some sectors that probably have the ability to fund this innovation more effectively than we do. And I think that's certainly one of the key advantages for us, is kind of tagging on in a sense to some of those coattails.
So I would like to I'd like to pivot what you just said in a slightly different way, because as an association, you might not be replete with cash, but there is an entire set of industries that are ancillary that represent a lot of revenue. Because everything we're talking about today, for the audience that is listening from a telco perspective, there is enormous economic opportunity. And in your case, you have hospitality, you have entertainment, you have food and beverage, and then you have all of this sports enablement from the Nikes of the world to every industry subsegment that services the players, the fans, the families, etc. So it's not that the industry is lacking revenue opportunities. It is there needs to be a curated way. How does a telco turn the needs that you have to transform into a revenue growth opportunity?
Yeah, and I think one of the opportunities there is integration, frankly. So if I look at a standard stadium experience, we will work with numerous third parties. So you mentioned some of them already. We have hospitality, we will have catering, we'll have souvenir stands. We will have people offering the ability to upsell an experience in the stadium. We will have partners like Nike is a really good example, who may well be interested in offering people discounts on football kits if they've come to a certain match on a certain day, and moving that data around in a way that is seamless to the consumer and is also low impact for me as the stadium operator, is a really interesting challenge for us. Even simple things for us, like trying to get Apple Wallet and Apple Pay running effectively on our turnstile systems. It takes us way more effort and energy than it really should, because we're trying to integrate a whole bunch of disparate systems that, because there are stadia around the world, but there's not millions of them. All those integrations tend to be a little bit custom, and so a way to take some of that pain away from what we're trying to do, and put that, in the edge, but not in the cloud potentially, is a really exciting opportunity, really interesting opportunity for me as a stadium operator, or somebody that's trying to delight the fan.
Well, so Brian, if I take that example, this is not for lack of technologies to transform, because we all have, I have tons of Alexa devices. Oh, I said the word, and now 2 devices just lit up. We have automation in our everyday lives. So it's not for the lack of access to the technology, but really the challenge that Craig is mentioning is the integration. How do you create a fan 360 view so that someone, whether it's the stadium owner or the franchise, can curate a personalized experience and leverage thousands of signals, from calls to in a call center, to telco, to telco connectivity, Wi-Fi experience, what you see on your phone, or e-commerce purchases. There is a similar complexity of an ecosystem in healthcare and life sciences, right?
There is. And Craig, in the US, I know that we have 5G in ultra wide in 47 stadiums, 55 markets. We take what you shared to heart with our partnerships, not only in auto racing, but with NFL and the NHL. So, Taran, to your point, those learnings are highly leverageable to other verticals. And if I think of that, typically where innovation, I feel, and I've been trained, comes at I'll call it the edges of the smiley, or the edge of the curve. First, it's a ultra specific use case that's critical. And I'll share one of those in a moment. And the other is a simplistic use case, and then you start trying to converge in the middle. So Craig, for you is just getting Wi-Fi and getting receptivity across the stadium, just for fans to use, or just for your registers. And then you start adding on, right? You start adding on additional use cases. In the US, I know that there was a lot of sensors put inside of helmets for trauma, and taking that data and studying for concussions. For us, as I shared, is a use case that you can read some more data on, is our partnership. Taran, to your part about it takes partnerships, and then telcos working across, is what we've done with a company called Metavis. And our partnership with Metavis and the VA and Microsoft. And if you haven't seen it before, it's almost like if you've seen any science fiction movie where you've seen the 3D hologram of a specific part of the anatomy, and it's rotated around, and you can see exactly where the injury or the trauma is. Well, that's live. That's real today. The difference in healthcare, though, is it's the quality of service has to be guaranteed, right? So if the stadium goes down, or if somebody doesn't get it on the instant replay, nobody likes it. It's like, oh, moan, but you didn't lose a life.
Yeah, indeed.
So in healthcare, what we've done is we've taken, I'll call it the mission critical, right? So mission critical for disaster recovery, for different war games, but in the Metavis example is 3D imaging in real time with haptic sensor feedback, right? So the duality of having that technology and partnering, what would be good, right? So now, as I said earlier, the majority of the world doesn't have the medical care that we enjoy in either most of the European Union or here in the UK. So if that's true, and even with that, now that we have COVID, what are you doing for remote surgery? Because now the best surgeon in the world can't get to you, or now you're in a satellite. So the feedback that's critical is multi-pronged. One of the things that we've done is in partnering and working is having a second set of eyes. So while the scope, the camera, et cetera, is performing surgery, those data points, so Craig, to your point, just the tons of data, and Bob, maybe you can talk about how on using MEC that's possible. The tons of the terabits of data that are coming in are analyzed and thrown up against other cases in real time. Because it's possible the surgeon missed something themselves, right? So it's a second set of where a digital eye scanning, seeing where a scope is going to detect an abnormality that maybe for that microsecond, the physician looked away. Or the haptic feedback that they need in that moment, right? So, and that requires the speed and the latency in order to do that. So those are some of the, I'll pause there for a moment, and maybe Bob, you can comment on the need, and that's a high use case of 3D, so that you have augmented reality for surgery that then allows you to scan the data and then I'll actually give feedback in real time for not only the surgeons there, but the surgeons remote. Bob, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, wonderful lead in. You know, those are the use cases that really drive this kind of converged state between the network and MEC and edge computing. Because what happens is the responsiveness is critical. So think you're just one hop from that data coming off that machine or those sensors to the compute and back to the doctor on their tablet or their reading screen. So that is exactly where the power of this begins to exhibit itself. So you're bringing all that together. I think one thing too to think about is have the potential to uncomplicate the integration of this, right? Because now it's all together. So you can, in more simple policy statements, make this all happen. So it's like, you know, the one thing that's positive to me about these kind of meetings is this is the way we build the ecosystem. I know it was talked about earlier on in the discussion, you know, you get all these different players in a venue coming together to create an experience. I think we have a point in the future where all of the offerings can be kind of combined into one platform, simplifying policy. But the example you gave is just spot on. I mean, you can see it in a stadium. The one in a stadium that's similar is like a 4K video. That's a lot of data. And you want to be able to use that data in various ways throughout the stadium, maybe for a fan, maybe for a coach, all kinds of things. So again, it's this ability to have the network and compute right together. So again, the data coming from the devices, boom, it's there, and then it's back to the individual that needs to take action, just one hop. So hopefully that kind of personifies exactly what you were kind of putting out.
It does. Tehran, if I could add now, the second part of your question and what Craig was sharing is now, if that is a highly specific and it's leveraging all the cool technology, and we can all wrap our minds around the benefits. So now, how to get that to the masses? As Craig was sharing, how do you get that to all the fans? How do we get that for healthcare? How do we get that to everyone? Because of COVID, we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, the meteoric 2,000-3,000, depends upon where you are, rise of telehealth. But now that's really been just a virtual meeting, right? So you're not getting the biometric data. We've had remote monitoring technology around for quite a while that picks up, and whether it's a simple Bluetooth device for heart rate, blood pressure, or et cetera. But there are technology, and now there's need, right? So that by looking at your phone, almost like the tricorder project, right? Now there is the ability to actually look at your phone and have your blood pressure taken by looking at the phone. So not only oxygen saturation and pulse, but that is just one marker. Because of the 5G MEC, what we'll now see is, and what we're excited and have to work with industry, is the proliferation of not only, Bob, maybe you can speak to the routers and the chipsets needed, but then how that will trickle down into the IoT and IoMT of things. So that way those data points that would be needing for a telehealth 2.0 visit, right? It's almost like if you think of whatever sci-fi you have, where there's a scan, or there's a prick of your finger and there's a blood analysis done. So those can be done right now, but it's the chipsets, because now, and working collaboratively in order to how to take that data and transfer it back, get it analyzed, and then remediated back in real time by the healthcare professional. So that's the widest use case. Everything else is around locations, right? Whether it be in the hospital, in the home, emergency care, all those are other settings that have their own unique problems and a different need of technology. But the widest use is around remote health, which is just health, just not in front of somebody.
Let's make this practical or tangible to our audience, because each of you represents an incredible expertise in one or more industries, but all of these up to now just sound like great ideas. And it's if I'm listening as an unsophisticated industry outsider, then with my lens, I think, well, okay, but what do I do as a telco? Maybe I can hear between the lines that I could stick a SIM card into a blood pressure monitor. Is that really the role? And you're talking about much more than that. So, Bob, I wanted to ask you. You said the word simplification in several times. What and if our focus for this discussion is how does a telco make money by creating an enablement and an ecosystem, let's take that thread, take it all the way through back to all of you, starting with you, Bob. What is the role that telco plays, and how do we step away from talking jargon that we understand in telco and apply it to the industry while actually building a revenue engine for our telco?
Well, I would say that, again, if you look at a factory or a hospital or even a venue, there's one thing that's common is there's a mobile worker walking around trying to do work, either servicing a client, building something in the factory, taking care of a patient. What this technology and what the carriers can begin to bring to both an on-premise experience and in remote locations is just a better mobile worker. And if you think about the technology here, we're combining it was talked about the router and switches before. You're combining all that technology into a single framework. So when you think of anything that moves the needle for industry, it's something that creates a better experience or reduced cost. Well, you're going to help in both those by making sure the wheel doesn't spin on a tablet, right? That always makes everyone happy and more efficient. This technology will do that. The other thing is it does drive cost down because you have a top to bottom virtualized stack. You have 1 or 2 boxes where you had 10 before, or 5 or 4. So it's very pragmatic. I mean, it's just like what happened in the centralized cloud is now coming to the edge of the network. But it really comes down to is a better experience for delivering some kind of solution that matters to your customer or to your business.
But Bob, how far down the value chain does that mean that we need to be involved? Do we engage in the quality of experience of the connectivity, or do we venture deeper into the industry?
Well, I think you think at looking at, because you're able to run applications on top, you have to give consideration to it. And given that we can put edge computing out there, we do have the ability to do more quality of service capability. That does create better experience for the app, for the user, for the device. So unequivocally, because you're delivering that is a top to bottom kind of experience, and that has value. So you can translate that in, it's more than connectivity now. It's connectivity with guaranteed experience. It's connectivity with guaranteed security, right? It's connectivity with all these other elements that were very difficult to do before. So there's no question it's like there's a term I had an old boss tell me is you're looking to unleash trap value with stored value. Anytime you can take all of those brownfield circumstances, get them connected, and then begin to make them better, let's say combined in a converged environment, you're going to unleash trap value. You'll unleash excess cost. You'll do all kinds of things that then allow you to monetize the service.
Craig, does that sound familiar? Is that part of the opportunities that you see for your segment?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think speaking as possibly the only true customer on the panel, I suppose. Ultimately, we are going to be driven by things, the simple triad of cost, time, and quality. If a telco can come to me and say, I can do this for less money in a way that brings it to market more quickly than somebody else and with a higher level of quality, because I understand the network that you're operating on, because I have the geographical reach, because I can deal with the concentration of participants or players or whatever that use case happens to be, then we're absolutely going to listen and going to want to understand more. I don't think a telco necessarily needs to demonstrate a deep understanding of an industry. I think what they do have to be able to demonstrate is an understanding of how there are relevancies, if that's a word, between the industries they operate in, and demonstrate their ability to draw things out of those to help spark some ideas within the industry itself. We can generate ideas. Sometimes we just need a spark plug to help us get that engine going, basically.
It almost seems like you are also a potential sales channel, because
Absolutely.
if you're not the direct customer, all of those adjacent segments that we talked about, F&B, food and beverage, hospitality, and the player, coach ecosystem represents the target industry that you could be an enabler with a telco as a partner to solve for those industry challenges.
Absolutely. I think we can easily become a walking, kicking advertisement for future mobile technologies. So if I think about my other use cases about grassroots football players and how we can create more value for that process. So if you think about a grassroots football team in a village somewhere in England, if we are working with a partner that puts a 5G network into that space, and they can then advertise and using technologies like, I don't know, TinyML or Edge AI or one of these kind of emerging technologies that puts more of that intelligence towards the edge of the network, the ability for that small team to record their football matches, to automatically clip the files locally without coming back to me in the center, and to create little packages of a highlight reel, a sizzle reel, if you like, for that game, to enable, to empower that community, especially when right now with COVID and all the restrictions, and as you know, we are a little bit stricter with our restrictions in Europe, as you may be in North America just now. People can't get out to watch a football match right now. If we can create an opportunity to allow them to package that up, to share it more broadly, there are opportunities behind that. We don't necessarily, as the governing body, want to be involved in the revenue generation capability there. Our mission, as I said earlier, is to create a fitter nation by encouraging people to play football. If we can work with our partners to create the monetary opportunity for them that gets more people playing football for us, it's a win-win, really. I think it's a really exciting. There's an exciting set of opportunities to explore.
It's interesting because what you just brought up is the topic of convergence, right? So not only is this a complex ecosystem with a lot of opportunities just for your segment, but in the example you gave of get the content out into the hands of the fans, now it's convergence with the media entertainment industry and the experience that people will have engaging with the content created through your channel. Brian, earlier when you talked about telehealth, and telehealth is not new. The technology and the capability has been around for a long time. What COVID has changed is not just, it didn't accelerate telehealth just because we didn't want to be in the physical presence. There are some significant regulatory hurdles, like practicing across state borders, that were put on hold, which have unleashed a wave of transformation. What is the opportunity that the new world is bringing to telcos, and where does one start? If I'm looking at a segment, whether it's healthcare and life sciences, which you are taking that, Verizon on that journey, any other industry, where do you get started? Who do you hire and what do you build?
Wow, right? I think we only have like 10 minutes left. So, but one of the things, if you think about, I'll call it health. It's called telehealth, but if you want to just reduce it to health, and with COVID, I'll share that what I've seen is the impact, and what we've all seen is the negative impact that COVID has had in us not getting out. And Craig, to your point, if it's not important that we be the subject matter expert in all areas, which I am not, in healthcare or life sciences, but to be aware of the first and second level impact. One of the impacts that we are all facing is we're all aware right now that there's actually 2,000 COVID clinical trials going on right now. So if you look it up on clinicaltrials.gov, there's approximately 2,000 going on. And we're all waiting to see what happens and hoping they go. Now, that they're all successful, and we do hope they are for everyone. In the meantime, though, there was, I'll say that most folks weren't aware that what clinical trials were. So that has been a huge impact, right? The world is now challenged because of the other 50-some thousand clinical trials that were recruiting. And usually recruiting means that they were going to their doctor's office, the hospital, et cetera, and they were being touched and say, hey, could you participate? So now that pipeline, while you used other methods, that was one of the tried and true pipelines of getting people in. So I'll call it the diabetes research, the Alzheimer's research. Everything else has been almost put on hold. At the very least, it's negatively impacted. So as a telco company, and also telco, our reach into media and our reach into the consumer area, is we understand the impact that has, not only to pharma, but also then the downstream cost of healthcare for all of us, whether it be the government or the payer. And then you and I, the quality of our life. So that's part of that, I'll call it that human prosperity and digital inclusion that we're thinking through of what can we do as Citizen Verizon to impact that? What can we do to help? Because that's not going away, right? That time, those airplane seats, so to speak, those airplanes took off and those trials are stagnant. They're on the ground until they can get filled. So, and then once so what can we do to help reach? Just get the word out, right? Get the word out and then get people included for the part of that inclusion. And then Bob, as you were speaking, what if our technology stack can help enable their participation that otherwise they were going to have to go to the doctor's office? Rudimentary IoT, but now there's an acceleration in the conversations we're having with many folks, I presume, in the audiences. What can we do to help accelerate the acceptance? Teron, you mentioned the regulation around telehealth on data points that are gathered through RPM. So those data points are critical in order for the trial to be accepted and validated. So I'll take that as a very specific use case that has broad reach, but I'll say that it wasn't the primary result you think. That's a secondary. And then when you start thinking all the tertiary and downstream impacts that have, they need to be remediated. They need to be thoughtfully addressed. That's, Teron, to broaden your question, that's what we're thinking, and to the people in the audience, those are the conversations, and the folks who are considering that's where our partnerships lie, right? That's what we can enable together.
That's a great point that I want to punt to you, Bob. Telcos and carriers have to rely in any way on a network of partners, device manufacturers for orchestration. What is your advice on how to partner and leverage your network of suppliers to solve for these complex ecosystem problems?
I think it's pretty pragmatic. I mean, think about Brian and Craig both. They're kind of vertical experts, and Verizon was smart enough to bring in those vertical experts. It's kind of like what we're trying to figure out is you have this wonderful physical environment at a football field or a hospital or an industrial plant that has experts that understand all that technology and use case out there, and then we have this new digital kind of connectivity that with compute with it that we can bring. I had an old professor who said the best thing you can do is go see, interact with those folks that are in that physical environment and create as simple a kind of experience in using your technology. So it's the venue's creativity, it's the healthcare professionals' creativity, it's the industrial engineers' creativity that begins to figure out how to make this truly deliver value. Now, the only way you figure that out is to go see, right? And invite experts in and bring people like Cognizant in who have experts in those industries. So that's part of what this is about, is, and then slowly but surely we begin to spin the flywheel up because we're creating more expertise, right, in the SI community, more expertise, you know, even in the client environment. They begin to grasp what this can do for them. Us in the technology and the carrier space, we begin to say, how can we simplify this? Because we begin to see how it's really being used. So, you know, in any kind of, there's in the developed software world, you have this model, 2-10 minute, right? You got to find 2 definitional clients, then you jump across the chasm to your 10. And that's where we're at, right? And we want to just do that vertical by vertical. And all of us need to own kind of building that ecosystem out.
Craig, your perspective, if you were in sitting with the board at a telco and they would ask you, what do we do with all of this technology to actually solve your industry's problem? What role do you want them to play and help you create that ecosystem?
I probably run the risk of just repeating Bob, I think. I mean, I love the concept that he's introduced there. You know, kind of go out and see, go out and listen, go out and talk. I've always said in my own career as a technologist that one of the most important things that I can do is not presume that I know more than my customers. So when I'm building technology solutions, and I've seen it in the FA right now, where some of the solutions that I'm replacing were probably built by really good technologists that didn't really understand the problem they were solving for. So never presume that you know more than your customer. If you can go out and talk to your customer with a little bit of humility and give them the space to articulate it, you might not find the perfect articulation of the problem, but you'll get more information, and through iterating that, you'll be able to create that killer product if it exists, or that killer technology that enables the killer product. You know, I think there are lots of ways that a telco can add value in that chain. It doesn't have to be the product. It doesn't have to be just the backbone or the infrastructure. But the only way you're going to figure that out is by going out and talking. And I think approaching in the right way, you'll find a lot of people like me out there that are really happy to have the conversations, that are happy to give a little bit of time to help you understand that, to hopefully generate opportunities for both sides of the relationship.
That's a great point, and it's not about the whiz-bang gadget of today, because the technology will change tomorrow. What we've talked about today is solving fundamental complex issues that can't be even addressed or financed by one particular organization for an industry. Brian, your last thoughts on that, on what is the most important role for a telco to play in transforming an industry segment?
So my role is, and Craig and Bob, I echo what you share, is that I fully know that I do not know more than any one of my customers, especially with the myriad of verticals or segments in healthcare. I know that I'm merely a translator. So I have these amazing people behind me inside of Verizon that are just out of this world smart and technology. And then when you're meeting with the patient, so the clinical trial sites that I've been to, or the hospitals that I'm on the board of, and going into clinic pre-COVID, and hearing and seeing that last mile challenge. So Tehran, to your part, is that our role is chiefly, I'll call it, to be that B2B, that business to vertical, that B to V that you mentioned. So that way our customers solve that point of connection, that point of service, that point of care. So that's the B2V. And for us, that's the chasm, as Bob said, is carefully selecting and accepting that we can fail. And not fail with healthcare, but fail with the expectation, integration, the device didn't work, et cetera, so that way you can improve it. It's iteration that's going to work. but selectively curating those use cases that we know that will, the old expression is wash, rinse, repeat. And one of the most famous commercial development people has shared it. If you help enough people, you eventually help yourself. And that's our role right now. All of us is in our roles. How can we help the most amount of people, right? So that way, that 2, 10, then to 1 million. So that's what I know that I'm doing, and that I'm supported in doing, and that's what's most important, is that B2V, to allow that B2C.
I want to highlight to those listening that you have 3 people who are the smartest technologists that I've ever met, and yet the words that you've heard are experience, quality of experience, do good, solve a humanistic problem. And I think that that is the tenet of being successful. It's exactly what the point you made, Brian. Look at the human side of it. What does it feel like to go into a stadium and for you to know who I am, to personalize my care, and the technology will follow. Myself as a technologist, I'm fine with leading with what is the experience that you want to change, and then the technology solution will follow. And last words from all 3. We have a few seconds. Bob,
No, thank you very much.
Craig.
No, again, thank you for allowing us the time to share some ideas.
Thank you, Brian.
I'll say thank you, and I welcome questions, comments, follow on. We want to work with Innovate. We want to be B2B, and we are.
Great. I also welcome you. You can find me on LinkedIn, and feel free to field more questions, and have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Taran.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, great. Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.